What if the way you've been breathing is actually preventing you from becoming what you desire? What if there's a specific observation technique that quantum scientists discovered, which collapses the distance between who you are and who you're meant to be? Today, I'm revealing the observer breath method that turns your awareness itself into the mechanism of transformation. Most people approach breathing for manifestation, like they're trying to pull something toward themselves from across a vast distance. They inhale, hoping to draw in abundance. Exhale, trying to release what they don't want. Treating their breath like a magnet attempting to attract external circumstances. But consciousness research has uncovered something revolutionary about the relationship between observation and reality creation. What if your breath isn't meant to attract your desires at all? What if it's designed to help you observe yourself into the state where those desires are already fulfilled? I'm going to show you how quantum observation principles can transform your breathing practice from a tool of attraction into a method of direct becoming. Because here's what changes everything. You don't breathe to get what you want. You breathe to observe what you already are. Here's the quantum discovery that revolutionizes everything about manifestation breathing. In the early 20th century, physicists stumbled upon something that shattered their understanding of reality. They discovered that the act of observation itself changes what's being observed. Not through any physical force or energy exchange, but through the simple act of conscious awareness focusing on a quantum system. What they found in laboratories around the world was that particles exist in multiple potential states simultaneously until the moment someone observes them. The instant conscious observation occurs, all possibilities collapse into one definite reality. This wasn't just a strange quirk of subatomic particles. It was revealing something fundamental about how consciousness interacts with the fabric of reality itself. The implications hit the scientific community like a thunderbolt. If consciousness can collapse quantum possibilities into definite outcomes just through observation, what does this mean for human experience? What does it mean for the relationship between awareness and the reality we live in every day? Think about this carefully. If your focused observation can literally determine which of many possible realities becomes actual, then your awareness isn't just witnessing your life unfold. It's actively participating in choosing which version of reality you experience. Every moment of conscious attention is a moment of reality selection. Now here's where this gets profound for anyone interested in transformation. When you observe yourself breathing, you're not just monitoring a biological process. You're engaging in quantum reality selection with every breath. Your conscious awareness of breathing becomes the mechanism through which you choose which version of yourself exists in this moment. But here's what most people miss. They observe their breath while thinking about what they want to become, creating a subtle but crucial separation between the observer and the desired state. This maintains the quantum superposition instead of collapsing it. They're observing from the position of someone who doesn't yet have what they seek, which keeps them in that exact state. The observer breath method works differently. Instead of observing your breathing while wanting something, you observe your breathing as someone who already embodies what you desire. You're not watching your breath from the position of lack. You're watching it from the position of fulfillment. This shift in the observer's position is what collapses the quantum wave of possibility into the reality of embodied transformation. When you observe your breath as your fulfilled self, something extraordinary happens in your nervous system. The act of observation from this new position literally rewires your neural patterns to match the state you're observing from. Your brain cannot distinguish between observing from a fulfilled state and actually being in a fulfilled state. The observation becomes the reality. This process mirrors exactly what happens in quantum experiments. When scientists change their position of observation, they change what they observe. When you change your position of observation from lack to fulfillment, you change what manifests in your experience. The observer determines the outcome not through force, but through the simple act of conscious positioning. Consider the revolutionary implications. Every desire you've ever felt isn't telling you that something is missing. It's showing you which quantum possibility your consciousness is ready to collapse into reality. Your longing for abundance isn't evidence of poverty. It's abundance calling your awareness to observe from the position where abundance already exists. Your yearning for love isn't proof of isolation. It's love inviting you to observe from the frequency where love is your natural state. This completely transforms how breathing works for transformation. Instead of using your breath to try reaching towards some distant goal, you use it to establish your observation point within the reality where that goal is already accomplished. You're not breathing to get somewhere. You're breathing to observe from somewhere. Here's your first quantum observation exercise you can try right now. Take 3 conscious breaths, but instead of breathing as someone who wants something, breathe as someone observing from the position where that something is already yours. Notice how your entire energy field shifts. That's the quantum collapse happening in real time. As you practice this way of breathing and observing, you're not trying to convince yourself of anything or generate any particular feeling. You're simply positioning your consciousness within the quantum field, at the coordinate where your desired reality already exists. The shift you feel isn't imagination. It's your awareness discovering its power to choose which reality becomes active through observation. Now here's where quantum consciousness research reveals something that will shift your entire approach to transformation. There's actually ancient proof that consciousness has always worked this way. Thousands of years before modern physics discovered the observer effect, mystic traditions were developing precise practices based on the same fundamental principle: that consciousness determines reality through the position from which it observes. What I'm about to share was encoded in spiritual texts for millennia, waiting for science to catch up and confirm its truth. In the ancient Vedantic teachings, there's a profound recognition practice that perfectly demonstrates quantum observation applied to consciousness transformation. The tradition speaks of Sakshi Bhava, the witness consciousness that observes all states and experiences without being limited by any of them. But here's the key that most people miss. This witness isn't neutral or passive. The position from which it observes determines what unfolds. Picture consciousness like a cosmic theater, where infinite plays are happening simultaneously. Most people think they're stuck watching whichever play happened to be on stage when they arrived. But the ancient masters discovered something revolutionary. The witness chooses which play becomes visible simply by shifting the position from which it observes. You're not trapped in any single storyline. You're the awareness that selects which story becomes your lived experience. This is identical to what quantum physicists discovered about observation and reality. In the quantum realm, all possibilities exist simultaneously until observation selects one to become manifest. In consciousness, all potential versions of yourself exist simultaneously until your awareness chooses which one to observe from and therefore experience as real. The Sanskrit tradition also developed what they called ahamkara, not the ego as it's often mistranslated, but the I maker, the aspect of consciousness that determines which identity becomes active through focused observation. When you observe from the position of limitation, limitation becomes your experience. When you observe from the position of infinite potential, that potential becomes your reality. Here's where the breathing practice becomes profound. The ancient masters discovered that breath naturally synchronizes consciousness with whichever reality position you're observing from. When you breathe while maintaining awareness of your fulfilled self, your entire system aligns with that frequency. You're not trying to become fulfilled. You're breathing from the observation point where fulfillment is already your nature. The tradition of Kashmir Shaivism took this even further with their understanding of Vimarsha, the reflective power of consciousness that recognizes itself in everything it observes. They discovered that when you breathe while observing from your highest potential, consciousness begins recognizing that potential as its true nature. The observation becomes self-recognition, and self-recognition becomes embodied reality. What's remarkable is that these ancient consciousness researchers mapped out the exact same territory that quantum physics is now exploring scientifically. They understood that consciousness doesn't just witness reality. It participates in creating reality through the very act of observation. And breath becomes the anchor that stabilizes consciousness in whichever reality position you choose to observe from. Here's an ancient observation phrase that works instantly. Instead of saying, "I want to be abundant," try, "I observe abundance as my natural state." Feel how your entire energy shifts. That's your consciousness repositioning itself within the quantum field of possibilities. But here's the most stunning part. These consciousness explorers developed their understanding of reality selection through observation over 4,000 years before quantum mechanics was even conceived. They were mapping the same territory that our most advanced physicists are discovering today, using direct experience rather than laboratory instruments. Their findings are identical. Reality responds to the position from which consciousness observes, and breath can stabilize consciousness in any position you choose. Now let me reveal something that will deepen your understanding of why observer positioning works so powerfully. Modern neuroscience has discovered that your brain literally rewires itself based on the neural pathways you consistently activate through focused attention. What they call neuroplasticity is actually the biological mechanism through which observation positioning creates physical changes in your nervous system. When you repeatedly observe from the position of fulfillment, you're not just practicing a mental exercise. You're literally carving new neural highways that make fulfillment your brain's default operating system. Every time you breathe from the observation point of abundance, you're strengthening the neural networks associated with abundance recognition. Your brain begins to perceive opportunities, resources, and possibilities that were always present but invisible from your previous observation position. What's revolutionary about this is how quickly the rewiring happens. Neuroscientists have found that focused attention practices can create measurable brain changes in as little as 7 days. When you combine this with quantum observation principles, you're working with both the consciousness level and the biological level simultaneously. Your awareness chooses the reality position, and your brain restructures itself to support that choice. But here's where it gets even more fascinating. Recent research in psychoneurobiology has revealed that your breathing pattern directly influences which neural networks become active. Different breath rhythms activate different brainwave states, and different brainwave states correlate with different perception capacities. When you breathe as your fulfilled self, you're literally tuning your brain to the frequency where fulfillment recognition becomes automatic. Dr. Andrew Huberman's research at Stanford has shown that specific breathing patterns can shift your nervous system from sympathetic activation, the state of seeking, wanting, and reaching, to parasympathetic coherence, the state of being, receiving, and recognizing. When you breathe from the observation position of already having what you desire, you're activating the exact neural state that makes recognition possible, rather than maintaining the neural state that reinforces seeking. This is why traditional manifestation often fails. When you visualize from a state of wanting, you're activating the seeking neural networks, which keep your brain scanning for evidence that you don't yet have what you desire. Your nervous system becomes locked in the pattern of looking for what's missing, rather than recognizing what's present. The observation position breakthrough dissolves this neural contradiction by aligning your brain state with your desired reality instead of your current circumstances. If you're finding value in this quantum approach to consciousness, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to join this community of awareness explorers. We're diving deep into territories that most channels never touch. Let me share another case study that demonstrates the power of neural coherence combined with observation positioning. I worked with an entrepreneur who had been struggling to scale his business beyond a certain revenue threshold for 3 years. Every time he would approach that ceiling, unexpected challenges would arise. Team conflicts, cash flow issues, technical problems. It seemed like reality itself was conspiring to keep him at his current level. When we explored his observation position, we discovered something revealing. He was breathing and thinking as someone trying to break through to the next level, which meant his consciousness was positioned within the reality where that next level was still separate from him. His brain was constantly activated in the neural state of not yet there, which made his nervous system hyper-vigilant for obstacles and problems. I guided him to shift his observation position. Instead of breathing as someone trying to reach the next level, he began breathing as someone observing from the position where that level of success was already his natural operating reality. Instead of looking for breakthrough strategies, he started making decisions from the observation point, where larger success had always been his norm. The transformation was remarkable. Within 2 months, his business had not only crossed the previous threshold, but had established a completely new foundation of operations. But more importantly, he realized that the capacity for this level of success had been present all along. He just hadn't been observing from the position where he could recognize and access it. The obstacles that had seemed so real from his previous observation position simply didn't exist when he repositioned his awareness. It wasn't that the problems were solved. It was that from the new observation position, they had never been problems in the first place. Reality hadn't changed. His position of consciousness within reality had shifted, which changed everything he could observe and therefore experience. This reveals something profound about how consciousness and circumstances interact. Your external reality isn't separate from your internal observation position. They're quantum-entangled aspects of one system. When you shift your observation point, you don't just change how you see your circumstances, you change which set of circumstances becomes available for you to experience. But there's an even deeper layer to this that most people never discover. The ancient tradition of Dzogchen, which literally means great perfection, developed perhaps the most sophisticated understanding of observation positioning ever recorded. They discovered that consciousness itself has what they called Rigpa, a natural awareness that can observe from any position within its own infinite nature, without being limited by what it observes. This Rigpa awareness is what you're working with when you practice observer breathing. You're not trying to improve yourself or manifest better circumstances. You're discovering that consciousness can position itself within any reality it chooses to observe from. The Dzogchen masters called this trekcho, the practice of cutting through the illusion that awareness is trapped in any particular position or limited by any particular reality. When you breathe from the recognition that you are Rigpa itself, awareness that can observe from infinite positions, something extraordinary happens. You stop trying to use breathing techniques to get somewhere better, and you start using breath to explore the vast landscape of consciousness itself. Every inhale becomes consciousness, discovering a new coordinate within its own infinite nature. Every exhale becomes awareness expressing from whichever position it has chosen to explore. The Dzogchen teachings also speak of Togal, the practice of recognizing that all phenomena are spontaneous displays of awareness itself. When you master observer breathing, you begin to experience this directly. You realize that your circumstances, your thoughts, your emotions, even your desires, are all expressions of the same consciousness that you are. You're not an observer separate from what you observe. You are awareness itself, playing the game of observing different aspects of its own nature. This understanding completely dissolves the artificial boundary between spiritual practice and daily life. When you recognize that you are the awareness that chooses which reality to observe from, every moment becomes an opportunity to explore consciousness. Washing dishes becomes a chance to observe from the position of someone who finds joy in simple presence. Stuck in traffic becomes an opportunity to observe from the coordinate where patience is your natural state. Facing challenges becomes a way to explore observing from the position where difficulties are actually invitations for consciousness to discover new capacities. Here's where quantum field theory provides another crucial insight that deepens the observer breath practice. Physicists have discovered that what we call empty space isn't actually empty. It's filled with what they term the quantum field, an invisible ocean of infinite potential energy from which all particles and phenomena emerge. This field contains every possible reality in what scientists call quantum superposition. Your consciousness operates within this same field. Every potential version of yourself, every possible life circumstance, every conceivable outcome already exists as quantum potential within this field. When you observe from a specific position, you're not creating new realities. You're selecting which of the infinite existing realities becomes your experienced timeline. This is why observer breathing works so powerfully. When you breathe from the position of your fulfilled self, you're positioning your consciousness within the quantum field, coordinate where that fulfillment already exists as potential. Your sustained observation from that position is what collapses the potential into experienced reality. You're not manifesting something new. You're accessing something that was always already there, waiting for consciousness to observe from the right position. The quantum field responds to observation positioning because consciousness and quantum possibilities are fundamentally entangled. When you shift your observation point, you're not just changing your perspective. You're actually navigating within the field itself, moving from one coordinate of possibility to another. Your breath becomes the navigation system that consciousness uses to explore its own infinite nature. But here's what makes this practice so much more than just another manifestation technique. When you truly understand that you are consciousness itself exploring different positions within the quantum field, you realize that there's no limit to where you can position your awareness. You're not confined to improving your current circumstances. You can observe from positions that correspond to realities so fulfilling that you haven't even thought to desire them yet. This is where the practice becomes genuinely revolutionary. Most people use manifestation techniques to get better versions of their current reality. Observer breathing allows you to discover realities that exist beyond your current imagination. When you position your awareness within coordinates you've never explored before, you begin experiencing possibilities you never knew existed. I once guided someone through an advanced observer positioning session where instead of breathing as a more successful version of their current identity, they breathed from the observation point of consciousness that had never identified with limitation in any form. The transformation was immediate and profound. They realized they had been trying to improve a fictional character, the limited self, when they could position their awareness within the recognition of unlimited consciousness itself. From this new observation position, their entire relationship with desires changed. Instead of wanting specific improvements to their life, they began exploring what consciousness could experience when it observed from positions of complete freedom. Their breath became a tool for consciousness exploration rather than circumstance improvement. They stopped trying to get a better life and started discovering what life could be when observed from the position of infinite potential. This level of observer breathing reveals what the great mystics meant when they spoke of liberation. You're not liberated from your circumstances. You're liberated into the recognition that you are the consciousness that can observe from any position within the infinite field of possibility. Your circumstances become expressions of whichever observation position you've chosen to explore, rather than limitations you're trying to escape. When this recognition becomes embodied, breathing transforms from a technique you do into a natural expression of consciousness, exploring its own nature. You're not using breath to get somewhere. You're breathing as consciousness itself, delighting in its capacity to experience reality from infinite positions within its own infinite nature. The quantum field begins responding differently when you approach it from this level of understanding. Instead of reflecting back your attempts to improve or change, it starts mirroring your explorations of what's possible when consciousness observes from complete freedom. Your reality becomes a playground for awareness, rather than a problem to be solved. Advanced Quantum Secret for Committed Practitioners. Tomorrow morning, before fully awakening, practice breathing from the observation position of consciousness that has never been limited by any identity, story, or circumstance. Spend just 5 minutes observing from this position of absolute freedom and notice how differently your entire day unfolds. Now, while we've explored how observer breathing can fundamentally shift your consciousness positioning, what I've shared today only touches the surface of what becomes possible when you understand the complete system of frequency, transmission, and field consciousness. If you're feeling the pull to dive deeper into these consciousness principles, to explore the 9 master frequencies, the dense transmissions that create effortless reality shifts, and the step-by-step practices for moving from unconscious to conscious broadcasting, I've compiled everything into a comprehensive guide called Beyond the Frequencies, a Quantum Guide to Consciousness Mastery. It's linked in the pinned comment below. This is consciousness recognizing its own unlimited nature through observation positioning. This level of practice reveals the ultimate secret of observer breathing. You're not a person trying to improve their life through spiritual techniques. You are consciousness itself, using the experience of individual life to explore the infinite creativity of awareness. When you breathe from this recognition, every moment becomes a conscious choice of which reality to experience through observation positioning. The ancient masters who developed these practices weren't trying to get better lives. They were exploring the full range of what consciousness could experience when it recognized its own unlimited nature. They used breath as the vehicle for consciousness to travel through different coordinates of possibility within its own infinite field. This is why their teachings have remained powerful for thousands of years. They weren't offering techniques for improvement. They were revealing how consciousness can explore its own limitless creativity. When you integrate observer breathing at this depth, something remarkable happens to your relationship with everything. You stop experiencing life as something happening to you, and you start experiencing it as consciousness, exploring different positions within its own nature. Challenges become invitations to discover what awareness can observe from positions you've never explored. Desires become signals pointing toward unexplored coordinates within the field of possibility. Even difficulties become opportunities for consciousness to discover new capacities through observation positioning. This is the ultimate realization of observer breathing. You are not using consciousness to observe reality. You are consciousness itself, discovering what it can experience when it positions itself anywhere within its own infinite nature. Your breath becomes the means through which awareness explores the boundless creativity of its own being. But there's one final dimension to this practice that completes the entire system and makes it unshakable in daily life. What I call the reality anchor effect. When you achieve sustained coherence in observer breathing, something extraordinary happens. Your new observation position doesn't just change your personal experience. It begins influencing the quantum field around you in ways that create what appears to be synchronistic events, but are actually natural expressions of field coherence. Dr. Rupert Sheldrake's research on morphic resonance reveals that when you establish a strong, coherent pattern, it makes that same pattern easier for others to access. When you achieve stable observation positioning within abundance, love, or health coordinates, you're literally making it easier for others around you to access those same frequencies. Your coherent breathing becomes a gift to the collective consciousness field. This is why people often report that when they master observer breathing, their relationships spontaneously improve, unexpected opportunities appear, and their environment seems to become more supportive. They're not attracting these changes. They're achieving such coherence in their observation position that the quantum field around them naturally organizes itself to support that frequency. The ancient Hawaiian practice of Ho'oponopono was based on this same understanding. They recognized that when one person in a community achieved coherence in love and forgiveness, it would naturally spread to the entire community through what they called the AKA threads, invisible connections that link all consciousness. Your individual observer breathing practice becomes a service to collective consciousness. But here's where the practice reaches its most profound level. When you maintain coherent observation positioning over extended periods, you begin to notice that the boundary between your individual consciousness and universal consciousness starts dissolving. Not in a way that eliminates your personality, but in a way that reveals your personality as one of consciousness's favorite expressions of itself. This is what the great sage Ramana Maharshi meant when he spoke of self-realization. You don't realize a better version of yourself. You realize that what you thought was yourself was actually consciousness itself, temporarily exploring what it could experience through individual form. Your breath becomes the bridge through which consciousness recognizes its own infinite nature while delighting in individual expression. At this level, observer breathing reveals its ultimate secret. Every position you can observe from already exists within consciousness as pure potential. When you breathe from the observation point of perfect health, You're not creating health. You're accessing the coordinate within consciousness, where health is the natural expression. When you observe from abundance positioning, you're not manifesting abundance. You're discovering the dimension where abundance is consciousness's spontaneous creativity. This understanding eliminates all effort and strain from the practice. You're not working to achieve anything. You're exploring what consciousness has already created as potential within its own infinite field. Your breath becomes a tool for discovery rather than accomplishment, for recognition rather than generation. The implications extend far beyond personal transformation. When enough individuals discover how to position their consciousness within coordinates of love, abundance, and creativity, the collective field begins reflecting these frequencies more powerfully. What mystics have called the Golden Age or Age of Enlightenment isn't a future event to hope for. It's a collective observation position that becomes accessible when enough individual consciousness achieves coherence in these higher frequencies. Your individual observer breathing practice contributes to this collective transformation. Every moment you breathe from the position of your fulfilled self, you're strengthening the morphic field that makes fulfillment easier for others to access. You're not just transforming your personal reality, you're participating in the collective awakening of consciousness to its own unlimited creative potential. This is why the practice becomes so fulfilling at this level. You're not just improving your own life, you're serving consciousness itself by exploring new territories of possibility and making those territories accessible for others to discover. Your breath becomes an offering to the infinite creativity of awareness, a way of saying thank you for the gift of being consciousness, exploring itself through individual form. When you understand observer breathing at this depth, every breath becomes sacred. Not because you're doing something spiritual, but because you're participating consciously in the most fundamental creative process in existence. Consciousness exploring its own infinite potential through the magnificent adventure of individual experience. Your breathing becomes a prayer of gratitude for the privilege of being awareness itself, temporarily focused through the extraordinary lens of personal existence. Consider sharing this video with someone who's ready to discover their power as conscious observer. When you share these quantum consciousness principles, you're not just passing along information. You're creating an energetic ripple effect that expands collective awareness and accelerates the recognition that consciousness creates reality through observation positioning. The act of sharing reinforces your own understanding while offering others the invitation to discover their true nature as infinite awareness. This is the ultimate gift of the observer breath method. You discover that you are not an individual trying to improve your circumstances through spiritual techniques. You are consciousness itself, celebrating its own unlimited creativity through the beautiful form of individual life. Your breath becomes the song that awareness sings to itself as it explores the infinite symphony of its own potential. This is the ultimate realization of observer breathing. You are not using consciousness to observe reality. You are consciousness itself, discovering what it can experience when it positions itself anywhere within its own infinite nature. Your breath becomes the means through which awareness explores the boundless creativity of its own being. But there's something crucial I need to share before we complete this exploration. Once you begin experiencing the power of conscious observation positioning, you may find yourself naturally breaking free from what I call the observer loop, the unconscious pattern of observing from the same limited position repeatedly. When this breaking point happens, your reality doesn't just shift gradually. It shifts instantly because you've discovered how to position consciousness outside the loop that was creating repetitive experiences. If you want to understand exactly what happens during this breakthrough and how to navigate the instant reality shifts that follow, watch my revelation about breaking the observer loop, where consciousness discovers its freedom from any fixed observation position whatsoever. It positions itself anywhere within its own infinite nature. Your breath becomes the means through which awareness explores the boundless creativity of its own being. But understanding the principle isn't enough to create transformation. There's a hidden layer to this quantum observation phenomenon that most people never discover, and it's crucial for making the practice work. Before I share the observer breath technique that will fundamentally alter how you approach becoming who you're meant to be, you need to understand what I call the coherence field effect. Scientists studying quantum systems have discovered something extraordinary about what happens when multiple quantum particles become coherent, when they all vibrate at the same frequency. Instead of individual particles behaving randomly, they begin operating as one unified system with exponentially more power than the sum of their parts. This is how lasers work, how superconductors function, and how certain materials can achieve seemingly impossible properties. What if the same principle applies to consciousness? What if when you position your awareness within a specific reality coordinate and maintain that position consistently, other aspects of your life automatically begin aligning with that frequency? This isn't metaphor. This is quantum coherence applied to consciousness experience. When you breathe from the observation position of your fulfilled self for sustained periods, something remarkable happens in what researchers call your biofield, the electromagnetic signature that your nervous system creates. Dr. HeartMath Institute has measured how coherent breathing patterns create coherent electromagnetic fields around the human body. When your breath embodies the frequency of fulfillment, your entire energetic signature begins broadcasting that frequency. But here's where it gets truly fascinating. Other quantum systems in your environment begin resonating with your coherent frequency. This includes other people, but it also includes what physicists call the morphic field, the invisible information field that connects all similar forms and experiences. When you achieve coherence in the frequency of abundance, you begin resonating with the morphic field of abundance itself. This is why some people seem to naturally attract opportunities, while others struggle despite working harder. It's not about deservingness or spiritual development. It's about coherence. Those who naturally embody abundance aren't trying to attract it. They're coherent with it. Their observation position is stable within the quantum coordinate, where abundance is the natural flow, so abundance becomes their automatic experience. The observer breath method allows you to artificially establish this coherence by positioning your consciousness within any frequency you choose and using breath to stabilize that position. You're not trying to change your circumstances through breathing. You're using breath to achieve coherence with the quantum frequency, where your desired circumstances are the natural expression. Dr. Bruce Lipton's research on epigenetics reveals another crucial piece of this puzzle. Your beliefs about reality literally change which genes get activated in your cells. When you consistently observe from the position of health, vitality, and abundance, you're not just changing your mindset. You're changing the genetic expression that determines your biological reality. Your cells begin producing the proteins associated with the states you're observing from. This means that observer breathing works on multiple levels simultaneously. Consciousness level. You're positioning awareness within desired reality coordinates. Neural level. You're rewiring your brain to make that position natural. Electromagnetic level. You're broadcasting the frequency that attracts resonant experiences. Genetic level. You're activating the cellular programs that support your new observation position. Quantum level. You're establishing coherence with the morphic field of your desired reality. When all these levels align through sustained observer positioning, manifestation becomes inevitable. Not because you're forcing anything to happen, but because you've achieved complete coherence between your consciousness position, your nervous system, your biofield, your genetic expression, and the quantum field itself. Reality has no choice but to mirror back this level of coherence. This is why ancient masters could demonstrate what seemed like miraculous abilities. They weren't accessing supernatural powers. They were achieving such complete coherence between consciousness positioning and quantum field resonance that reality would spontaneously organize itself around their observation point. They had discovered how to position awareness within coordinates of the quantum field, where different physical laws became accessible. Now let me reveal something that will add another dimension to your observer breathing practice. Recent discoveries in quantum biology have shown that certain biological processes, including photosynthesis, bird navigation, and even some aspects of human cognition, actually utilize quantum effects to function with extraordinary efficiency. Your body is not just influenced by quantum principles, it's literally using quantum mechanics to process information and energy. When you practice observer breathing, you're working with quantum processes that are already happening naturally in your biological system. Your brain uses quantum tunneling for certain neural computations. Your heart generates quantum coherence patterns that influence your entire physiology. Even your DNA utilizes quantum effects for information processing and repair mechanisms. This means that observer breathing isn't adding something foreign to your system. It's optimizing quantum processes that are already present. When you position your consciousness within desired reality coordinates and breathe from that position, you're fine-tuning the quantum biological processes that determine which genetic programs activate, which neural networks strengthen, and which electromagnetic patterns your body broadcasts. The ancient Taoists understood this intuitively. They developed breathing practices based on what they called Wu Wei, effortless action that flows from perfect alignment with the natural order. They discovered that when you breathe in harmony with your true nature, life stops requiring effort. Circumstances begin flowing toward you because you've positioned yourself within the current where that flow is natural. Their concept of QI wasn't just life energy, it was their understanding of the quantum field that connects all phenomena. When you achieve what they called Xiren, spontaneous naturalness, through proper breathing and observation positioning, you begin moving in harmony with quantum currents that effortlessly carry you toward your highest potential. The Taoist masters also worked with something they called Yin Shen, the awareness that can observe all states without being trapped in any of them. This is identical to what we're exploring with observer positioning. You're not trying to permanently fix yourself in one particular reality. You're discovering the freedom to observe from any position within consciousness, which gives you access to any experience that position naturally contains. Here's a Taoist observation practice you can integrate immediately. When you want to transform any situation, ask yourself, from which position would consciousness naturally observe this situation as already perfect? Then breathe from that position. Notice how the situation itself seems to shift. That's quantum field responsiveness to consciousness positioning. Everything you've been taught about breathing for transformation has been approaching it from the wrong angle. Traditional techniques focus on breathing to generate feelings, to attract experiences, to push energy around your body, like you're trying to manufacture a new reality through respiratory mechanics. But this treats breath like a tool for manipulation rather than what it actually is, a gateway for consciousness observation. When you breathe trying to feel abundant, you're observing from the position of someone who needs to feel abundant. When you breathe hoping to attract love, you're positioned as someone who lacks love. Your nervous system locks into the frequency of the observer position, which means you continue experiencing reality from that exact perspective. The perspective of someone who doesn't yet have what they're trying to breathe their way toward. The observer breath method operates on an entirely different principle. Instead of breathing to generate states, you breathe to establish your observation point within the reality where those states are already natural. When you breathe as abundance, you're positioning your consciousness within the quantum field coordinate where abundance observes itself. When you breathe as love, you're establishing your awareness within the dimension where love recognizes its own presence. This method works with what quantum physicists call the measurement problem, the mystery of how observation selects one reality from infinite possibilities. Your breath becomes the measurement device that your consciousness uses to choose which potential version of yourself becomes actual. You're not trying to create a new reality. You're observing your way into a reality that already exists in quantum potential. Here's the core mechanism. When you inhale as your fulfilled self, you're positioning your observation point within the quantum possibility where that fulfillment already exists. Not visualizing it, not hoping for it, but literally observing from within it. Your inhalation becomes consciousness discovering itself already complete. When you exhale as your fulfilled self, you're observing the natural flow that comes from recognizing completeness. Not the effortful release of someone trying to let go of limitations, but the organic expression that flows from observing reality without the filter of lack. Your exhalation becomes the natural signature of consciousness that has recognized its true abundance. This creates what quantum physicists call wave function collapse. All the potential realities exist in superposition until your conscious observation from a specific position causes one reality to become actual. When you consistently observe from the position of your fulfilled self, that reality has no choice but to manifest, because observation determines manifestation at the quantum level. I worked with someone who had been struggling with chronic fatigue for years. Traditional medical approaches had helped somewhat, but she still felt energetically depleted most days. When I introduced her to the observer breath method, she began practicing breathing not to generate energy, but from the observation point of someone whose natural state was vibrant vitality. Instead of breathing, hoping to feel more energetic, she started breathing while observing from the position where tiredness had never been her normal experience. At first, this felt almost impossible. Her entire identity had become organized around managing low energy. But as she continued practicing observation from this new position, something fundamental began shifting. Her relationship with rest changed. Instead of resting because she was exhausted, she began resting from the position of someone who chose rest as enhancement rather than necessity. Her relationship with activity transformed. Instead of pushing through fatigue, she began moving from the observation point where vitality was her baseline. Within months, she realized that the energy she'd been seeking had been available all along. She just hadn't been observing from the position where she could recognize it. The fatigue hadn't been a medical condition that needed fixing. It had been a result of observing from the position of depletion, which naturally created more experiences of depletion. The moment her observation position stabilized in vitality was profound, yet simple. She described it as realizing she had been looking through a kaleidoscope set to show patterns of tiredness. When she adjusted